Okay, folks, we're going to start this up. We are, as of today, we have actually completed our first unit last week. So just a quick reminder that each unit of study lasts 3 weeks, and so we're starting a new one this week. Same structure though, right? So this week, reading, watching, journaling. Next week, making stuff with new media. Third week, pulling it all together. So that's what we're doing now. I'm going to kind of divide my time this morning between tying up a few loose ends to composing in context and then introducing the next unit, which is really on composing in design and visual art. So that's sort of what we're up to this morning, and I hope you guys are doing okay. It's like we're getting into the thick of it, into week 4 here, so things move right along pretty quickly. Okay, so here's my plan. I've got a few announcements and a few review questions for you, and then again a kind of quick wrap up, just adding a couple things that I kept mentioning I would mention and didn't have a chance to do it until this morning. So to wrap up the first unit and composing in context and give it a kind of final spin, and then to introduce the new unit. So that's the agenda for this morning. Okay, so in the announcements category, the use of new media is integral to contemporary composition in more ways than one, right? So the contemporary moment is flooded with new media. You know, it's all over the place, everywhere, all the time. So in that sense, it's integral. It's also integral in that you need to sort of remember the Facebook rule. Like anytime I assign anything like related to blog or website or anything else, my expectation is that you're going to figure it out. That's part of the class. Because that's how it pretty much is going to work in the regular everyday world and in the professional world. So it's kind of a matter of just paying attention. So imagine this is I'm an internship director or a potential employer, and I send you an email and it's got a very specific instruction what I want you to do, and you don't get to that paragraph. That's bad, right? And I know it's picayune, but that's the way the new media thing works. You have to just slow down and pay a lot of attention. So that's my pitch there, is I just want you guys to understand there is a method to that madness, right? I really want you to problem solve. So if you get stuck, you have to problem solve, and obviously if you get really, really stuck and you seem to be spinning your wheels a lot, the basic thing to do is ask a friend or someone else that's in the class, or yell really loudly and ask me, send an email, or send an email to Greg. So it's not like we're leaving you dangling all by yourself, but use your usual strategies. You know, whatever you normally do when you get stuck with a freaking computer problem, do that here too. So and again, that is integral to this class. It's hard to do professional work in almost any field these days without being comfortable doing some of that work online. Comfortable and competent. So that's what this is about. It's a chance for you just to sort of get that layer of skill sort of raised up a little bit. I'm going to need you guys to double check the directories for ePortfolios and blog directories. I want to see if I can show you what I mean here. And there's no way that you could figure this out on your end, and I'll tell you why. So I'm going to go to the blogs directory. Again, everybody has access to this. Now what I want you to notice is you see some really regular kind of addresses. I'm going to try this one. I'm not sure this is going to work. Sorry if this happens to be you. You're going public now. Okay, that one worked. Now you're going to notice these big, some really super long ones. And in some cases, the person has corrected this already. What I can do is if you enter one of these more than once, I can go back in and clean up the data, the spreadsheet. That's not a problem. But it is a problem if the only address you have in there looks like this one. This is what I get. Okay? So this is really important, and this is what I mean by these picky little details. The annoying thing about this is that when you go to this long address and click on that link, it works. Anybody know why? Yeah, because you created it. It's yours. But if I or any of your classmates here want to go and check out what you've got on your blog, we can't get there. So let me go back to that again. Now this is on you guys to do this, because when we get to checking in work for midterm time, right? If I can't see your blog, you're going to be like on a sinking ship, right? Because those pieces of writing you do in that third week are very important. Why? Because that's where you're pulling the whole enchilada together. That's what I want to see. I want to see that you're making connections. Making connections equals learning. It is literally about making synapse connections in your head. And so if that's not evident in your blog post, then we got issues, right? Because that's where you want to be making those connections, pulling it together. So anyway, go back to when you go to the blog directory and also the ePortfolio site directory, if you have one of those, pardon my expression, long-ass URLs there, you can bet that it's probably not going to be visible to anybody but you. And again, this is not your fault. This is just the way the software works. So please check those directories ASAP. Pleasure. That was well punctuated. That was perfect. Okay. So let me see here. Okay, and the last announcement is the midterm is set for October 14. So that will be a Tuesday. It will be in this room. There will be all multiple choice questions that you will answer via the iClicker. Okay? And prior to that time, probably the week before that, I will put out a study guide of all the questions I'm going to select questions from. So behind the scenes, what I'm doing, right, is making questions every week based on just what's said at this podium. If I didn't say it, if Norman Coates didn't say it, if Gail Clements didn't say it, it's not going to be a question for the midterm or final. But the converse is also true. If I said it, she said it, he said it, then it could be a question. So that's put that in your calendars. Assuming you keep a calendar, that October 14th will be the midterm date. Okay, so we got a couple of polling. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it true that we have to write 24 paragraphs?
Well, no, it's probably not going to be 24 paragraphs. You'll find that some of the content pieces. I know. Thanks for raising that, because I want to go to the assignment at the end of the session. It won't be quite that. It sounds worse than it is. Some of the content is really short. Some of it's videos and stuff, so you won't have to, it won't be too arduous. Okay, so we're going to have a couple of polling questions this morning, and then a couple of review questions that come out of Gail Clements' presentation and also Norman Coates' presentation. So again, just to keep this sort of flowing.
It says it's closed, the poll. Oh, sorry. Sorry.
It's okay.
Do you have to hit send? Yes. I don't think you do.
If you just press A, let's check it right.
Yours doesn't work.
Okay, let me. Okay, so this would just be something to keep in mind. This data comes from the Kaiser Foundation. I think they're in their third iteration of doing a survey, massive numbers of young people and use of new media. And so the correct answer is A, 53 hours per week, y'all. That's a lot, in other words. So for artists, again, I mean, we can all kind of worry that, and probably a lot of people in this room don't do media 53 hours a week, and maybe you never did, because if you're practicing your music all the time, or whatever you're doing, if you have some serious involvement, you probably don't have the time for 53 hours. But actually, this number of 53 has gone up from the last time, and what the people at the Kaiser Foundation discovered was that it went up because of multitasking. Now, I know you guys probably do this, and my house looks like this with my kids. It's no one seems to just be watching TV anymore. That's a kind of exotic concept. So, at least my kids, it's usually they've got their phone, and they're checking various things and also watching TV. So the Kaiser people tried to account for that to get the total number of hours. But, the standard sort of measure of this, 40 hours a week is a work week, and this is 53. This is a lot of time. So again, the plus side for young artists is to realize there's one heck of an audience there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, about the internet as a context. So that's one of the things we're going to finish up with. So in case you want to look it up, if you Google for Kaiser Family Foundation media, you'll get all kinds of charts and graphs and stuff like that. Much of it's quite intriguing. Obviously a moving target, and that's why they repeat the study every several years. The most recent one looks like 2010, but they'll do it again, I'm pretty sure. Okay, next question.
It is true.
This will exhaust my entire knowledge of Spanish, but I'll say, muy interesante. Very interesting. That actually, this is something that flabbergasted me the first time I saw this study, which was the first one they ran something like probably 10 years ago. This was also true then. Far and away, television is the most. So the correct answer is A. Only 4% got that. And again, we may have to factor in the idiosyncratic nature of this audience, right? So most of you guys may actually be in the category of less TV. Now, this is how it gets difficult for the people at the Kaiser Foundation, right, is that, all you guys probably do this, or certainly know people that do a lot of this. It's like the way people watch TV has shifted a lot, right? So people watch series on their phones and move content around on different screens now that used to be a TV. And then, of course, now you've got smart TVs that let you do the other thing. And but anyway, yeah, the correct answer is TV content is still by and away the big one in terms of how people are consuming content. And so here's the numbers. I just copied this one chart for you guys, but again, if you want all kinds of charts and graphs, you can see that by Googling the Kaiser Foundation Media Study. But you can see, so on a daily basis, you have that sort of 10-something hours a day, right? Out of that, almost half, almost like 4.5 hours of TV content. So, again, as young creatives, interesting, right? That this is still a medium of great exposure, and yet also, as I mentioned, a medium that's now diversifying across different devices. So something to keep in mind.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I don't see phones.
Yeah, they break it out. You'd have to look at a different chart. They break it out by sometimes by device and sometimes content. And I think they broke this one out by content for the reason that I mentioned. I don't know that 100%, but I'm 99% sure that that's why they did it this way, is because they know the TV could now be watched on an iPad, on a phone, on a regular TV, etc. So there probably is information disaggregated into device as well in this study. Okay. Okay, these are our potential questions for exam time, right? So this is a question from Gail's work.
Is that how fast the questions are going to be on the exam?
Yeah, that was 30. I'm going to give you guys a minute on the exam. Yeah. Yeah, so these are kind of for practice, right? And most people got this right. The correct answer is D. Topography comes from a different field, being geography, pretty much. And that's not a giveaway or anything, because some of these other things are different fields as well. But the ones that Gail mentioned, that people who like to compose in text, right, or language, draw on principles of psycholinguistics, sociolinguistics, and morphology. So morphology in particular is very creative, right? This is like neologisms or creating new words and things like that. So again, this is one that you want to study up on when you get the study guide out there. Okay, next one. So you have 30 seconds on these. Oops. Go by sequence, right? The last one is D. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, so good. And the reason I'm asking every speaker that comes, and by the way, our lineup of speakers next week, you'll get Will Taylor from the Visual Arts program. The week after that, we get our guy from way up high, like stratospheric, right? We get the chancellor the week after that, talking about composing in architecture. So that's what's coming up. But what I'm asking people to do is talk about the principles in their field, and then also talk about how they actually do their work, which could be quite different. So, you know, compared to what Gail said about, you know, the usual sort of composing an essay process, you know, the pre-writing, blah, 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 all that stuff, it's interesting that here you have a person that's actually a linguist who composes in text pretty much all the time, and number one on her list, starting point, is being inspired. So those are kind of good little details to pay attention to, and most people got that. Okay, next question. Okay, so Norman, this was a bit of a trick question. The majority of people got the correct answer is B. So he was talking about composing in the context of museums, right? Even though it was NASCAR, it was a NASCAR museum. So that was the trick part of the question. Probably if I had put NASCAR there, everyone would have got it. But it was actually part of a contextual field of just exhibit design in museum. So museum and theater were the two contexts. All right, last question for this session. Okay, sorry, some of these wordier questions are going to warrant that extra half minute. But yeah, by far and away, 75%, the correct answer is B. And so I really love this point, right? I think when we see artwork before we're really totally wired up to get all the conceptual nuances and all the intellectual input into it, if it's good, we still get the emotional charge from it, or the emotional resonance. So I thought it was really nice that Norman actually feels fine about that. If someone walks out of a show or whatnot with a kind of resonance coming from the work he does on an emotional level. So, okay, so those last four questions then are designed, to kind of keep the ball rolling in terms of getting you used to the kinds of questions you will see on the midterm and the final. So those are the kind of things I want you to be paying attention to. But again, when you're listening to the guest speakers, try to find the principles. So Norman mentioned, for example, another question I didn't share today, but the notion of intensity, movement, color. Remember those things? Those are the stock kind of things that go into lighting design. But again, his individual spin had other aspects to it that were quite interesting, right? So how many people would have thought that Norman would be a big fan of El Greco or a big fan of lighting in Rembrandt, right? So that type of thing. Okay, so I want to do just a quick kind of wrap up. I know we've gone through this list several times, but the last time you'll see it. So in terms of the unit on composing in context, the ones with the check marks are obviously the ones we've covered, I think, pretty well. We're starting to dive in pretty deep to the context of our own university, which I really love that we have a chance to do that. And the context of everyday life we've talked about a number of times, and Norman mentioned this as well, right? So the idea of walking around, always sort of composing, he mentioned in his own process how many problems he solves just, not when he's sitting down at a drawing board or anything, but when he's sort of out in the world. So that's sort of context of everyday life. And then the last one here, obviously with the guest speakers, we're diving in pretty deep to actually getting a window into the process of highly creative and highly skilled people on our own campus. So we're getting that idiosyncratic view of, okay, I get the principles for your field, right? This is how it would be written up in a textbook or whatever, but give me the real skinny. Give me the stuff. I want to know how you work. I want to know how you actually get stuff done. And that's lots of times a different kind of compelling story, I think, for me anyway. So I want to touch on these other things. These ones without check marks are the ones that I mentioned a couple times and said I would say a little bit more about, and that's what I'm going to do this morning, is just say a little bit more. Not a lot, just a little. So there are these other contexts. So this is a sort of cognitive anthropological context, okay? So one of my favorite frameworks, and it works pretty well, is to imagine that humans have 4 different and very basic ways of coming to know the world. And I sort of call those scientific, intellectual, aesthetic, and spiritual. So what I propose to you guys as young emerging artists is that art is actually a way of knowing. It's a way that humans have forever queried or asked questions of reality. So these are 4 different ways that humans frame questions, and they kind of say, yo, reality, what do you think of this? And so we kind of probe reality with these different methodologies, and then sort of combine them to compose at that level, at the level of just being a human being. So this is another context, the sort of cognitive, anthropological context. How do humans make meaning? So I call these ways of knowing or walks. So that would be another context. And then you see the layer below, too, that kind of the underpinnings for this would be a sort of cognitive or propositional sort of foundation versus an emotional experiential, which ties into what Norman said, right? So you can, if you totally get the intellectual side of what he's doing, for example, in lighting design, that's great, but you don't necessarily have to. In the aesthetic way of knowing, you're in pretty good shape if you're getting the buzz, if you're getting the emotional resonance. That's kind of partly why we're there for our work. Okay, so this would be another way to depict it, a kind of layered, different ways of knowing. The little strange attractor thing in the middle is designed to convey that, in fact, when we're moving about the world, we're not making firm distinctions between these ways of knowing. Chances are every one of these ways of knowing mixes in some of the other. So I don't think you'd ever find a purely intellectual construct or purely aesthetic or purely spiritual, purely scientific. They all involve, they're mutually implicating is the fancy word for it, fancy phrase for it. So that's, again, a kind of cognitive anthropological context for composing. How we work as critters or creatures. So that adds a check mark to that one. Just going to kind of move through these. This one I think I may have said something about on the first day. I'll say just a little more about today. Very interesting to me that current psychology is coming up with this idea that, you know, we think knowledge is super important, but it's also really important that we're using our brains to just get ourselves through the world. So the idea that even though we take it for granted that we perceive in 3 dimensions is sort of like and this comes out of the field of evolutionary psychology, that maybe we've been kind of misdirected by this knowledge thing in some ways, that we actually perceive the world 3-dimensionally and we kind of think 3-dimensionally as well. So this ties into the context of the context of physiology, human physiology, and composing. Okay, so perception as composition. This guy is very cool. Do anybody know Jacques Lacan? You heard of this guy? Very interesting guy. A French theorist, psychoanalyst, all that kind of stuff, but also fairly grounded in science, it turns out. But he has this wonderful construct. You can see the sort of humorous thing on the right there. You know, especially for the aesthetic way of knowing, I think we have to ask ourselves why it is that humans seem to be so intent on creating pictures, whether the picture is a play, whether it's a film, whether it's a painting, whether it's a piece of music. These are all representations from a psychological perspective. And why is it so intense? Why do ads or like magazines, or in the olden days anyway, magazines would have a big impact on how people did their own look. So what is going on there? So what Lacan proposed, and there's actually, what turns out there's pretty good scientific evidence that this kind of thing actually is the case. He proposed that early on in every human's life, they enter into what's called the mirror phase. And that's when literally the little human sees themselves in a reflection. It could be a window, it could be a mirror. And they suddenly have a realization that there's the me that's over here looking in the mirror or the window, And there's the me that's in the reflection or representation out that's external to me, right? So there's these two eyes. And what Lacan says is that the reason we get so caught up in representational activity and also modeling ourselves on how other people look is because even at a very early age, we choose the one that's external to us. And he theorizes that the reason we choose that one that's in the mirror is because compared to how we feel as a fairly helpless infant or whatnot, that one in the mirror looks pretty dang good, right? It looks like it's sort of cohesive, it's holding together, it's like, there I am, it looks okay, right? Whereas, I mean, let's face it, when kids are really small, they can barely pick their freaking head up. I mean, if you ever watch a baby, where it's like, oh my gosh, we don't remember that stuff, thankfully, I think, but it's really something. So anyway, Lacan paid attention to that. And so it kind of explains how some of us get really involved in the creative aspect of creating representations and why we're so responsive to them, because we've been responsive to them all our lives. We just didn't notice when we were really little. So that's another context for composing, is to think about the psychological aspect of representation. And Jacques Lacan is a good guy to look up in that category. So that's pretty much all except the social context, which, you read the McLuhan book. We didn't talk about it, but I sort of feel like that's okay, right? Because I think that book speaks really well for itself. So McLuhan's really a heavyweight thinker when it comes to articulating the contemporary world. Now, I don't know how many of you noticed this, but he wrote that book that sounds like it could be a description of the pretty much present day, at least lots of chunks of it sound like it could be written yesterday. He wrote that in 1964. So that's a pretty extraordinary act, right? And so how did he get there? Partly he got there where he wasn't really focused on the details. He was focusing on what makes this stuff, electronic media, what makes it work, and concluded that pretty much the driving force of it is the basics of electricity, right? So electricity itself. And then he proposed, that's what this drawing on the right, or this sort of montage is meant. He proposed this, that we're involved in this kind of unification of the internal human nervous system and the external grid, if you will. So that what's happened in the electronic age was brand new. There was the electric grid before, but it wasn't hooked up to us, too. But now it's all one giant sort of integrated circuit. So that's what he called attention to in the social realm. So he regarded electronic, he called it electric media, as an externalized nervous system. And he actually had some great phrases. I don't think this one was in that book you guys read, but he called it like, we're kind of like doing brain surgery on each other. It's a scary concept. But, the kind of just intense interactivity we have now that's access to each other's thought process. Sometimes pretty scary. If you read user forums online, it's dangerous for your attitude, right? You can wonder, who are these people, right, writing this way. But anyway, that kind of idea has originated with McLuhan, that this is an externalized nervous system. So the world, according to McLuhan, gets flooded, or word I like better is it gets slowly saturated. So saturation is an interesting kind of process. With liminality, what that just means in between, everything kind of interconnected, everything. The in-between suddenly becomes foreground. And this represents a big change, right? So that's what McLuhan called attention to. Boundaries, even, he talked about the light bulb, how that had removed the boundary between day and night. It's hard for you to even imagine a time when people actually had to struggle to keep light, certainly workable light, after dark. So again, connecting this to electricity, not necessarily to new media. Some big changes, all of them, in McLuhan's view, add up to blending or dissolving boundaries. So the world we live in today that I think McLuhan predicted pretty well in 1964 was one where if you can think of a boundary that has not been dissolved, let me know, right? It's just one thing after another, whether it's public or private. You know, how many examples of that have we seen? That boundary barely exists, right? Other ones really intriguing for us for you guys as young emerging artists are this blending of art and science, or art and you name it, art and social action. Again, this notion, if you want to hold on to one thing about the social context of composing, it's that you need to think about boundary issues, because we got them. We got boundary issues everywhere. And those boundary issues can be the source of huge aesthetic and artistic inspiration. That is sort of like the, pardon the expression, but that's sort of like one of the live wires in the contemporary moment. If you can explore that sort of area of boundary dissolution, or where things are a little wavy, interesting stuff is happening right in that zone. So that's kind of like the full wrap-up of the, composing in context. Lots of different contexts, and I think it's similar to what Norman was saying last time. When you really start adding it up, any of these kind of composing activities, any kind of artistic composing, even the kind of composing I'm doing in this class, it's very complicated. There's lots and lots of factors that go into this. Okay? So that's a kind of a list of some of the contexts that go into, that inform composing. So a final spin on that unit, which also kind of segues into the new unit, is that in the contemporary moment, you could think of it that context is increasingly used as text. Context, rather than being this kind of blank, neutral, nondescript, unnoticed background, context becomes raw material. Artists are typically in the contemporary area, they're working with context. So when you reach into your toolbox, you're not just, working with art materials, you're also working with context in a way that's qualitatively different. It's not like that didn't exist before, it did, but now it seems to be a real deal. The way that kind of translates into artistic activity is a lot of people are basically inventing genres. They're not inventing artwork. I mean, they are, but the first step is to invent a genre. That's kind of what's going on. So context is increasingly used as a material. So it's not just composing in context, and this is sort of a subtle one, but it's composing with context, using it as a material. And that makes a total connection with what I just said about McLuhan. So the boundary between text and context is not really easy to discern anymore. And again, for you guys, I'm always trying to think of these are opportunities, these are things you can think about. How can you get inside that context as text, place, and operate? Okay, so for example, one of the reasons I was so delighted that Norman came to talk to us, he didn't elaborate on this point, but Norman is a guy that works with context, not just in context. Okay, so, and he worked brilliantly, right? I think, I don't really have that much of a spot in my psyche for NASCAR, right? But that was a brilliant articulation of some of the essence of, car racing in the way that lighting stuff was done. So he's working with it. Also, you'd have to say, so this is a good example of the context. This is a pretty assertive context, no? This is not just a blank stage that just kind of sits there and the actors enliven it. This is a stage where the stage is one of the players. So these light patterns that change on the stage, that's a real character, right? So So that's another an example of Norman's of use of working with context, not just in context. He also does the, he didn't mention it last time, but he does the downtown every year. I think they'll do it this year too, the downtown lighting show that's always in the context of the real world, where there's an outdoor, it usually involves projections or some sort of user-activated lighting show. So again, noticing how foreground the background is in this, right? This is just a stage, but man, it's very assertive. And then, you know, if you factor in then the projections, the getting people's close-ups of actors' faces and stuff, quite a reasonably good example of the context as text. Another context to use is I just get a plug in here. If you're not taking art history, please do. Don't short yourself. Don't get out of this school without art history. It's a problem no matter what you're studying. You should have an absolute encyclopedic, not encyclopedic and like an art history major would have, but you need to have reference points, right, from art history. You really need it. So if it's not required of you, I recommend you take it as an elective. I mean, I think it should be the second. I think this class, some version of this class should be required for first year, and I think art history should be required as well. Shouldn't be art history, just visual art. Should be history of all the arts. But you need that vocabulary. And I thought Norman evoked why very well, right? So for inspiration and also just for technical cues and everything else. So I'm pretty sure this is El Greco, no? Yeah. So, you know, I just thought it was so beautiful that Norman actually carries something like this around in his daily life and Rembrandt and learns from these things. Doesn't have to be lighting design. I mean, there's an obvious connection there between lighting design and painting, but all of these things, and this is what the nature of this class, what I want you to do is see how visual art is not really separate from what you do entirely. You can borrow stuff from it, or what Norman said, you can steal stuff, steal principles, steal methods from these various fields of composing. So, again, another example of context there, history of art. So, let me show you some examples of either relatively or very contemporary artwork that kind of expresses this notion of context. Now we're kind of moving into the contemporary moment, back to the contemporary context. What is that? So, context and text kind of merging. Anybody know who this is? Who did this? Christo and Jean-Claude. So these are people that started working with context back in the 1970s. So another kind of word for it is site-specific art, where the context is really part of the piece. It's inseparable from the piece. So this is a series of islands in the Florida Keys, I believe it is, that were wrapped in this kind of fabric spread around these little islands. And this is a Christo drawing. Christo can really draw. And this is one. You guys, anybody seen the Maysles Brothers Running Fence movie? Raise your hand if you've seen that. I think I have it in the Blackboard resources if you want to see it. I think it's a really great documentary. It's got a kind of slowish pace for the contemporary moment, but quite beautiful. But anyway, so this is actually working with context as well. But you know who this is? Yeah, Andy Goldsworthy, another guy who basically, without context, he doesn't have any work. He goes out someplace and makes artwork with whatever's there. So, looks like the kind of environment where you find a lot of sticks, and so if he goes out and makes something, and really the only record of it is the photograph, or in some cases the movie, the video. So this is a place with some rock. So he goes out and does this stuff. Huh? I think they're just the same thing that's along there. I think it's like, maybe it's called fieldstone or something like that. It's just material that's out there in the landscape. It's a shape. It's not. There's no adhesive. There's no fasteners. It's just a build. It's built with just what's in the environment. So he doesn't take anything. No hot glue allowed. No rope or anything. And some of this stuff, it's amazing. There's a video of him working, and it's just amazing. He can spend like a lot of time constructing this very intricate thing of sticks in mid-air, and then gets to a certain point, it crashes, and he has to like sort of start over. So again, this is just going out to an area, collecting rocks that have slightly different tonality to them, and then composing that material into an artwork. Pretty neat stuff. So Andy Goldsworthy would be another one that uses context in a really active way. I'm going to try to play you this video. You guys raise your hand if you know the artist J.R. Have you heard of him? I'm going to play this short video, I hope. I hope this will play. Oh, good. I actually got sound. Okay. So this is a very contemporary artist who's working with context, and again, blending the boundary completely between social action and aesthetic activity. So this is a...
Hi, JR.
Hi there.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, so you're currently working on a large project. Can you tell me how this 28mm project started?
In 2004, I went in Clichy-Montfermeil, suburbs of Paris, to take large photos of the inhabitants of that neighborhood. A year later, the riot started from there in 2005, and the first car that burned in front of my picture bring my artwork in the front of the media suddenly. And I came back in that neighborhood in 2006 with my 28mm to take their photo with their truck. So I portrait them playing their own caricature, the way we see them from Paris. And I start placing them in the east of Paris, in the bourgeois areas of Paris. And you go from someone in the media that you can't recognize to someone that you can go and knock at his door, because on the photo there is his name, his age, and even his building number. In the same media that I saw the suburbs, I saw every day the Middle East conflict. So with my friend Marco, we decided to go there and just have a look by ourselves. With our French passport, we could go from both sides really easily. And we realized that we were the ones who had to photograph them and face them face to face on both sides of the wall. So none an Israeli or a Palestinian could have done that project. We met Israeli teachers, Palestinian teachers, taxi drivers, students, photograph them face to face, playing their own caricature, the caricature they see of the others through the media. And we placed them on their walls without any authorization on both sides. And you know what? We thought that we would be kidnapped, that we would be arrested, that we would be evicted, and we just came back with sunburn. The limit in that place was not where we think there. How can you imagine a guy in Ramallah accept that you placed an Israeli face on his house, outside of his own door, and he will have to explain every day why he accepted to have an Israeli in front of his door? The real heroes are sometimes not where you think they are. They are right there in the street, everywhere around you. In the Middle East, I realized that it was the first time I confronted my work to people who didn't have museums around them. Arriving in Sierra Leone, Liberia, Sudan, or Kenya, I started by Africa, I realized that the men were holding the streets, and I would have to confront them. They would be the curator of my exhibition. So I chose the woman subject, because I think that the woman revealed the whole condition of the society. I wanted to confront those portraits with the street. I started to look for anonymous women that are daily heroes, photograph them and place them in their own city, and make their story travel. They wanted to show another image of themselves. travel with the photo. I would travel in another country and meet other women and highlight them in the same way. In Kenya, for example, I use vinyl on the rooftop so that it would protect them from the rain. In each case, the people have to find their own interest in the project. In places like Kenya or Brazil, the confrontation and the experience with the people were so strong that it makes us want to come back and keep a link with those people. And there is even more places that I want to come back and continue, because sometimes the wave of the project can be read even when the photo is gone. You know, the photo is like paper, it's ephemeral, it goes with the time, but it always stays an image in your head. I'm not trying to change the world, but you know, when I see a smile up there in the favela or down there in Cambodia, in a way I feel like I achieved my goal.
Okay, so that's JR. So that's a guy that's, you know, doing a lot of boundary blending there, right? And taking some pretty basic art skills, right? So it's pretty easy to make blows up those photographs and wallpaper paste. So it's a lot in the concept, brilliant concept to actually make a difference in the world doing something like this. And also notice that last comment was exactly back to what Norman said about, you know, he's not trying to fill the world with a bunch of conceptual material. If he can just produce a smile somewhere, some kind of emotional resonance, that's good, right? So that's kind of the level he's working at on that. Okay, so that's again, a really contemporary artist. Sorry, trying to get to the next slide there to go that way. Now this is another guy. I want to show you a short clip of this this guy, Aaron Koblin. Anybody know his work? Heard of him? So this is a young artist. We started gradually getting into artists here that are pretty much, you know, within reach of you guys' age bracket. Again, not everybody's the same age in this room. I know that, but largely you're young folk, and Aaron Koblin is as well. So he's using. We're still kind of echoing back to the notion of context. So Aaron Koblin is using the internet and using internet-produced data as raw material. So in a way, he's using the internet as context. So I'll play this. I think it's this is a longish one, so we may not watch the whole thing.
So I think data can actually make us more human. We're collecting and creating all kinds of data about how we're living our lives, and it's enabling us to tell some amazing stories. Recently, a wise media theorist tweeted, "The 19th century culture was defined by the novel, the 20th century culture was defined by the cinema, and the culture of the 21st century will be defined by the interface." And I believe this is going to prove true. Our lives are being driven by data, and the presentation of that data is an opportunity for us to make some amazing interfaces that tell great stories. So I'm going to show you a few of the projects I've been working on over the last couple of years that reflect on our lives and our systems. This is a project called Flight Patterns. What you're looking at is airplane traffic over North America for a 24-hour period. As you see, everything starts to fade to black, and you see people going to sleep. Followed by that, you see on the West Coast planes moving across the red-eye flights to the East Coast. And you'll see everybody waking up on the East Coast. Followed by European flights coming in the upper right-hand corner. Everybody's moving from the East Coast to the West Coast. And then you see San Francisco and Los Angeles start to make their journeys down to Hawaii in the lower left-hand corner. I think it's one thing to say there's 140,000 planes being monitored by the federal government at any one time. And it's another thing to see that system as it ebbs and flows. This is a time-lapse image, that exact same data, but I've color-coded it by type. as you can see the diversity of aircraft that are in the skies above us. I started making these images. I put them into Google Maps and allow you to zoom in and see individual airports and the patterns that are occurring there. So here we can see the white represent low altitudes and the blue are higher altitudes. And you can zoom in. This is taking a look at Atlanta. You can see this is a major shipping airport, and there's all kinds of activity there. You can also toggle between altitude for model and manufacturer. You'll see again the diversity. And you can scroll around and see some of the different airports and the different patterns that they have. This is scrolling up the East Coast. You can see some of the chaos that's happening in New York, what the air traffic controllers are having to deal with all those major airports next to each other. So zooming back out real quick, we see, again, the US, you get Florida down in the right-hand corner. Moving across to the West Coast, you see San Francisco, Los Angeles, big low traffic zones across Nevada and Arizona. And that's us down there in LA and Long Beach on the bottom. I started to take a look as well at different parameters because you can choose what you want to pull out from the data. This is looking at ascending versus descending flights. And you can see over time the ways the airports change. You see the holding patterns that start to develop on the bottom of the screen. And you can see eventually the airport actually flips directions. So this is another project that I worked on with the Sensible Cities Lab at MIT. This is visualizing international communication. So it's how New York communicates with other international cities. And we set this up as a live globe in the Museum of Modern Art in New York for the Designing the Elastic Mind exhibition. And it had a live feed with 24-hour offset, so you could see the changing relationship and kind of some demographic info kind of coming through AT&T's data and revealing itself. This is another project I worked on with Sensible Cities Lab and currentcity.org, and it's visualizing SMS messages being sent in the city of Amsterdam. So you're seeing the daily ebb and flow of people sending SMS messages from different parts of the city until we approach New Year's Eve, where everybody says, Happy New Year. So this is an interactive tool that you can move around and see different parts of the city. This is looking at another event. This is called Queen's Day. So again, you get this daily ebb and flow of people sending SMS messages from different parts of the city. And then you're going to see people start to gather in the center of the city to celebrate the night before, which happens right here. And then you can see people celebrating the next day. And you can pause it and step back and forth and see different phases. So now onto something completely different. Some of you may recognize this. This is Baron Wolfgang von Kempelen's mechanical chess playing machine. And it's this amazing robot that plays chess extremely well, except for one thing, it's not a robot at all. There's actually a legless man that sits in that box and controls this chess player. This was the inspiration for a web service by Amazon called the Mechanical Turk, named after this guy. And it's based on the premise that there are certain things that are easy for people but really difficult for computers. So they made this web service and said any programmer can write a piece of software and tap into the minds of thousands of people. The nerdy side of me thought, wow, this is amazing. I could tap into thousands of people's minds. And the other nerdy side of me thought, this is horrible. This is completely bizarre. What does this mean for the future of mankind where we're all plugged into this Borg? That's probably being a little extreme. But what does this mean when we have no context for what it is that we're working on and we're just doing these little labors? So I created this drawing tool. I asked people to draw a sheep facing to the left, and I said, I'll pay you 2 cents for your contribution. And I started collecting sheep. And I collected a lot of different sheep. Lots of sheep. I took the first 10,000 sheep that I collected, and I put them on a website called thesheepmarket.com, where you can actually buy collections of 20 sheep. You can't pick individual sheep, but you can buy a single plate block of stamps as a commodity. And juxtaposed against this grid, you see actually, by rolling over each individual one, the humanity behind this hugely mechanical process. I think there's something really interesting to watching people as they kind of go through this creative toil. Something we can all relate to, this creative process of trying to come up with something from nothing. And I think it was really interesting to juxtapose this humanity versus this massive distributed grid. Kind of amazing what some people did. So here's a few statistics from the project. Approximate collection rate of 11 sheep per hour, which would make a working wage of 69 cents per hour. There were 662 sheep that didn't meet sheep-like criteria and were thrown out of the flock. The amount of time spent drawing ranged from 4 seconds to 46 minutes, so it gives you an idea of the different types of motivations and dedication. And there were 7,599 people that contributed to the project, or that were unique IP addresses, so about how many people contributed. But only one of them out of those 7,599 said this. Which I was pretty surprised by. I expected people to be wondering, why did I draw a sheep? And I think it's a pretty valid question. And there's a lot of reasons why I chose sheep. Sheep were the first animal to be raised from mechanically processed byproducts, first to be selectively bred for production traits, the first animal to be cloned, Obviously, we think of sheep as followers, and there's this reference to the Petit Prince where the narrators ask the prince to draw a sheep. He draws sheep after sheep. The narrator's actually only appeased when he draws a box, and he says, it's not about a scientific rendering of a sheep, it's about your own interpretation and doing something different. I like that. So this is a clip from Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. It's showing Charlie Chaplin dealing with some of the major changes during the Industrial Revolution. So there were no longer shoemakers, but now there were people slapping soles on people's shoes, and the whole idea of one's relationship to their work changed a lot. So I thought this was an interesting clip to divide into 16 pieces and feed into the Mechanical Turk with a drawing tool. This basically allowed, what you see on the left side is the original frame, and on the right side you see that frame as interpreted by 16 people who have no idea what it is they're doing. And this was the inspiration for a project that I worked on with my friend Takashi Kawashima. We decided to use the Mechanical Turk for exactly what it was meant for, which is making money. So we took a $100 bill and divided it into 10,000 teeny pieces, and we fed those into the Mechanical Turk. We asked people to draw what it was that they saw. But here there was no sheep-like criteria. People were, if they drew a stick figure or a smiley face, it actually made it into the bill. So what you see is actually a representation of how well people did what it was they were asked to do. So we took these $100 bills and we put them on a website called 10,000cents.com where you can browse through and see all the individual contributions. And you can also trade real $100 bills for fake $100 bills and make a donation to the $100 laptop project, which is now known as One Laptop per Child. This is again showing all the different contributions. You see some people did beautiful stipple renderings, like this one on top, and spent a long time making a very realistic version. And other people would draw stick figures or smiley faces. Here on the right-hand side in the middle, you see this one guy writing, 1 cent? Exclamation, really? That's all I'm getting paid for this? So the last Mechanical Turk project I'm going to talk to you about is called Bicycle Built for 2000. This is a collaboration with my friend Daniel Massey. So you may recognize these two guys. This is Max Matthews and John Kelly from Bell Labs in the 60s, where they created the song Daisy Bell, which was the world's first singing computer. You may recognize it from 2001 Space Odyssey, when Hal's dying at the end of the film. He starts singing this song as a reference to when computers became human. So we resynthesized this song. This is kind of what that sounded like. We broke down all the individual notes in the singing, as well as the phonemes in the singing. And we took all those individual pieces and we fed them into another Turk request. This is what it would look like if you went to the site. You type in your code. You first test your mic.
Hello.
You'd be fed a simple audio clip. Then you do your best to recreate that with your own voice. After previewing it and confirming it's what you submitted, you could submit it into the Mechanical Turk with no other context. And this is what we first got back from the very first set of submissions. So James Surowiecki has this idea of the wisdom of crowds, which says that a whole bunch of people are smarter than any individual. We wanted to see how this applies to collaborative distributed music making, where nobody has any idea what it is they're working on. So if you go to bicyclebuiltfor2000.com, you can actually hear what all this sounds like together. I'm sorry for this.
Sorry, guys. There'll be, these will all be, the slides will be available in the archive, right, if you want to go back and listen to the whole thing in less than about 20 minutes. We're only a little bit about halfway through. So interesting stuff, though, right? So you can kind of see, like, so let's do a comparison of this and Christo's work, for example, or Andy Goldsworthy, where you have artists going out into the world, creating some kind of representation in the world, and this is sort of pulling real-world data into some other frame, into an aesthetic frame. Do you guys know the website NB Flat? Anybody know that website? I'm going to try to show that one to you guys too. we have about 10 minutes left. I think maybe we can. This is one of my favorite websites. And it's quite similar to what Aaron Copeland was talking about there. You know, another sort of change in terms of breaking down boundaries is user-generated content. There's a lot of that going on now. So this is a guy who, I forgot his name, but he invited people to submit any kind of musical anything they wanted to, as long as it was in the key of B flat. And so he took all these submissions, and then a very simple technical thing to sort of create a whole bunch of YouTube windows on one web page. And then you can play these, and this is completely, just like Aaron Copeland was talking about, the completely sight unseen. You don't know what anybody else has done. You just send yours in. So you can just play these simultaneously. So you can kind of play that, and it's pretty interesting because you can then you can actually record those too. So you could make soundtracks based on that. But you get the idea, right? So that this is sort of like mixing the boundaries of context and sort of moving through in a different way. Okay, let me get back to where I was here. Okay, so the last piece of what I want to do, and I think we're just about down to the last 10 minutes here. So one of the things, and this is to talk about, a little bit about the assignment for the upcoming week, right? So this is a Gathering Perspectives week again. The question we're going to kind of focus on, or the goal for the course that we're going to focus on, is this one of, so we have all these contexts for composing. We know that some of them are artistic, some of them are everyday, some of them are all over the place. But what kind of concerns us in our own sort of work here is what makes artistic types of composing unique? Why is it special? And to sort of give away the story, but then you'll be able to read various angles of this story. What makes it unique is the creative process, right? So you're getting pictures of that from individual narratives of guest presenters and such, but also we want to do some background reading about different sort of frameworks or theories of creativity. This is one of the things you guys should emerge from the school with a greater knowledge of than people at regular kinds of schools, right? You should not only know how to be creative, you should also know something about it. So we're going to try to take that on. So one of the basic points, just to kind of introduce this idea and introduce the reading and the viewing for this week, is that every kind of composing, whether it's artistic or not, you could say it's got this continuum from prosaic to poetic or prosaic to creative, right? So what I want to encourage you to do is think about the ingredients, the process ingredients of various types of composing you do, and which ones are over at this end, on the poetic end, and which ones are more at the prosaic end. And again, that doesn't divide neatly. Just because it's an art composing doesn't mean it's creative, right? And just because it's not an art composition doesn't mean it's not creative. Does that make sense? I think so. So that's kind of what we're focused on this week. I got a couple of short video clips I just love this one. I'm going to make a couple plugs for documentary films. Anybody seen Cutie and the Boxer on Netflix? Yay, love this one. So we're basically this week we're gonna be reading up on and looking at various angles on the creative process. So that's the work. But I want to play you this. I love this opening sequence of that movie. Highly recommend that one if you get a chance to see it. My kind of painter there. It's actually a beautifully told story. This is it's a kind of a couple living in New York. This is I don't know if you guys anybody heard of Ross Lovegrove. And this is to illustrate the point. So the first guy obviously a fine arts painter. The second guy is a designer. We tend to think of design as having this a little more linear structure, but this guy, and I won't play this clip this morning, but you can play it online if you want to, is this working in the design realm, but he's working with biopolymers and all kinds of like exotic materials, and some of them very everyday, like working with studying the structure of meringue, that stuff that sits on a lemon meringue pie, and just in really combining the science and art in some fascinating ways. So this guy is kind of a wild man, but his name is Ross Lovegrove, and you could look him up if you want to see a kind of very highly creative person working in the design field. And this is a clip. I maybe have time to play this one because it's really short. This is a painter named Gerhard Richter, and he does an interesting combination of creative and sort of planning. I'll play this one for you.
Schwierig. Na gut, ich könnte ein bisschen besser sein. Muss ich einen Weg finden, dass das sofort genauso schnell geht und genauso frei und lustig und so weiter. Aber trotzdem dann fertig sind noch. Und gut sind. Die halten nicht lange hier. Das ist ja so, macht so viel Spaß und sieht gut aus für 2 Stunden. Manchmal für einen Tag.
Okay, so this guy's work, if you don't know it, is really, these are obviously just the beginning of painting, but this is pretty incredible stuff. Anyway, so I just thought he was interesting in the sense of every session that he paints is an act of improvisation. So he's up there painting these big giant oil paintings with big giant squeegees, right? There's a lot of improvisation in this. But at the same time, he's saying that it's very structured in a kind of design or analytic sense, right? So he's going to come back to these multiple times and eventually end up with these stunningly beautiful paintings. But he's combining this sort of analytic thing and also the highly creative improvisational moment. So a good example of someone who's combining stuff. So again, design process tends to look usually sequential, and creative process looks like something else, right? So I want to, but I think very often they're both involved in the same thing. So so this is where we'll close today. But where I want you to, what I want you guys to do is check the assignment. There's quite a bit of, there's 8 different people I want you to get their perspectives on in terms of creativity, and read the assignment carefully. Also, please, all the way back to the very first slide, make sure you check the ePortfolio directory and the blog directory, and if you find you've got one of those big, long URLs for your blog address or website address, just submit it again. What you do in your blog is you go into the View blog. You click on View blog, so you're seeing the kind of display interface, not the backstage interface, and copy the address. Once you're in View blog mode, you copy that address and paste it in the form. Okay? So again, looking ahead, guys, you have, next week we have Will Taylor visiting, astonishingly great visual artist right here on our campus. Week after that, Lindsay Berman, our own chancellor, to talk about working in a high-powered architectural office in New York City. So going to be some fun stuff. Hope you guys are doing okay, and I'll see you next time.
Oh, I know.